Hello my dear friends, how have you been? I'm Mari Thurger and I am very pleased you could join me once again in yet another year. Welcome to 2020. Since this is the first video of this year, I would like to start with a subject related to life rather than death. New beginnings always start with life, and well, even if death is present, it's just one step for the beginning of a new life. Now, just a reminder, you can follow me on other social media where I occasionally share information among other things that you might find amusing or maybe not. You can also support me on Patreon. The help of my patrons has been surprisingly helpful, so I can acquire resources and deliver proper content. And if you enjoy my videos, don't forget to subscribe and click on that little bell icon to receive all the notifications from this channel, and you won't miss a thing. Now, on this video today, I'm going to talk about the gift of the Vanir. Following the video I have done about Vanir, many of you have shown interest in wanting to know more about this tribe of gods from the Norse pantheon. But before we really start to talk about the main subject, I think it's important to express the perception of life in Nordic paganism. Because indeed, the gift of the Vanir is the gift of life. So, let's start from there, and I hope you enjoy this video. As an archaeologist, I often talk about death to express the religious and social realities of the past. Indeed, 90% of the archaeological work, at least for me, is spending time with the dead, because it's in their graves that we find a great deal of the material culture. And the way the final resting place has been arranged tells us a lot about the mentality of a people. Even the study of rune stones, they are memorial stones to the dead and expresses passage from the myths and heroic poems. We sure talk a lot about death when it comes to ancient civilizations, but not nearly enough about their lives. When it comes to Norse mythology, we also talk about death quite a lot, and the afterlife, because the perception of life after death for pre-Christian Scandinavians is indeed quite elaborate and fascinating. So we often get the wrong impression that these people were really concerned about the life after their deaths, concerned with the beyond, and life simply revolved around that. And that is a terrible mistake. And the first thing that comes to mind when speaking about the pre-Christian Scandinavian religions and mythology is, of course, Valhalla. That idea of dying gloriously in battle to be accepted in Valhalla and spend eternity in that afterlife place. It almost feels like these people only cared about battle, and the objective was to die in the battlefield to reach Valhalla, as if it were the only destination after death. And you really must go there to be with the gods. A poorly romanticized idea. Of course, I'm not going to develop in this video, not today at least, about the concept of Valhalla. But indeed, it must be pointed out that the idea of the violent death and the figure of a constantly raiding Viking who lived a warrior's life hoping to die in battle to go to Valhalla is in fact a literature phenomenon. Don't get me wrong, Valhalla was perceived to be an afterlife place, but not for the common warrior. Most likely it was an afterlife place for the warlike elite, for nobility. There are specific afterlife places in Norse mythology for each social class. And this desire to die in battle to reach Valhalla is a later concept created to motivate warriors to go into battle without fear in their hearts and receive a glorious death. By the hands of the 13th century Icelander Snorre Sturluson, Valhalla was equated with the Christian paradise and even with the Roman Elysium. Valhalla's location was even shifted into the realm of the gods. As I've said, a literature phenomenon. Pre-Christian Scandinavians mostly were farmers and hunters, craftsmen, fishermen, and their seafaring activities were mostly about trading. This almost sickening obsession with the afterlife is a Christian religious motif and attitude, which during the Middle Ages was absolutely focused on saving one's life and soul to acquire a place in heaven beside their Almighty God. During the early Middle Ages, Christians were absolutely focused and very much concerned with only living a life in a way that would ensure their place in heaven. So when we start to see a great emphasis on the afterlife, on the Old Norse literary works, that emphasis is due to Christian conceptions rooted on a society which was already 200 years at least culturally far from the pagan past. In other words, Christians were driven by the necessity to conduct their lives as a continuous preparation for the next life. Their concern wasn't this world, but a life in the next. Christians were focused on the afterlife. That was the big thing for them. The point of everything, actually. And it was, and still is, important to them to live their lives dedicated to the right afterlife. My point here is to make you understand that Christianity, like many such other religions, are world-denying religions. Worldviews is exactly what separates a pagan religion from another religion. Paganism isn't about worshipping many gods or having similarities in the religious panorama and folklore. Paganism isn't every religion that doesn't belong in the group of the three main monotheistic religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. What makes a religion pagan in nature is the world-accepting mentality expressed in it. When a religion is focused on the afterlife and death, and everything in this world is just a momentary passage, and we must prepare ourselves for our lives elsewhere after death, that sort of religion is a world-denying religion, not at all concerned with life itself and this world, therefore not pagan in nature. A pagan religion is focused on the life on this world and everything that belongs to life, including death, of course. A pagan religion is a world-accepting religion and accepts all that encompasses it. And the spiritual isn't somewhere on another world. Rather, this world already belongs to the spiritual reality, because everything is together in the same spiritual ecosystem, a web of life. While world-denying religions view life as a straight line with a beginning and an end, world-accepting religions view life as a cycle, a circle, a continuous existence of birth, life, death, and rebirth, and on it goes. While non-pagan religions see death as the end and spend eternity elsewhere, pagan religions see death merely as the beginning of a new cycle, and rebirth comes after. And there isn't an actual end. We see this in Norse mythology. Life begins with a cosmic entity called Ymir, and his death marks the beginning of the cycle of life. And in the end, the death of another god marks the final stages of a cycle. The god Balder is the exact same thing as Ymir. When Balder dies, all the events that lead to Ragnarok start to unfold until the destruction of everything to make way to the new cycle. Ymir dies and the cycle of life starts, Balder dies and the cycle comes to a point to start anew. Death in pagan religions always marks a new beginning. So there are no reasons to assume that the afterlife was as important to the pre-Christian Scandinavians as it was to Christians themselves. Nordic pagans believed in an afterlife, there is no doubt about that, but it was probably not as much the focal point of their religious practices, because the afterlife wasn't in some unreachable place, but it was here, parallel to this world. In this world, all around, everything dies to return again, and again, and again. So, to the Nordic pagans, much like any other pagan culture whose religions were world-accepting religions, death wasn't a desire. No one wanted to die so they could live happily ever after in some bright eternity and vast green fields and sweet angelic voices singing. Do be careful with that. When you notice a great emphasis on death and the afterlife in religion, philosophy and spirituality, you are dangerously close to the mentality of world-denying religions. So, to the pagans, the great desire was to live, enjoy life, constantly and forever, and even death marks the beginning of a new life, a new cycle. Various philosophical or exoteric systems, and even Christianity obviously, consciously and unconsciously approach the acceptance of death, either as inevitability or as a part of us. To be a pagan is to accept life and all that it contains, accept the living world, because death is an illusion and does not really exist in the pagan mindset, because we are simply and only spiritual beings coexisting with other spiritual beings in an endless web that can never be destroyed. Things just die to come back to life and start more life. Life does not end with death, but death is part of life and just a shift to continue on living. And that, my dear friends, is the true gift of the Vanir, life. To understand the power and the gifts of the Vanir, we must understand who they are. I'm not going to speak about each deity of the Vanir on this video, I've done that already. But as I have expressed before, the Vanir are perceived to be the second tribe of gods in Norse mythology, the other tribe of gods being the Aesir. But this perception of two tribes leads to the wrong idea that within Norse mythology, the Nordic pantheon is divided into two tribes only. And so every god must either belong to one tribe or the other. Things are not as simple as that. Simply dividing the gods into two tribes, and that's it. It's a common mistake to perceive the Norse pantheon as just two tribes. And if any entity or character from Old Norse literature understood to be divine in nature that isn't immediately perceived as belonging to the Aesir tribe of gods, people often automatically place those deities within the Vanir tribe of gods. The Vanir happen to be the group of gods who presided over peace and plenty, and the gods that we can immediately say they belong to the Vanir without a single trace of doubt are just three gods: Freyr, Freya and Njordr. But this leads to another problem, because certainly the Vanir are perceived as the gods of fertility and magic as well. And we know that other gods are also propitiators of fertility and magic. And some are within the Aesir or have no tribe whatsoever. This is why I say the Vanir are the gods of peace and plenty, not strictly the gods of fertility and magic, even though their powers are also about that. But as I have said, other gods outside the Vanir tribe of gods are also of fertility and magic, among other powers the Vanir also possess. The key to understand the Vanir is precisely understanding the powers they don't have in common with other gods of the Norse pantheon. And that is peace and plenty. Let me explain. We have the god Thor, for instance. He is half a giant and he belongs to the Aesir, and he too propitiates fertility. But that fertility aspect makes him a Vanir? No, it doesn't, because he is the god of thunder and god of battle, a warrior god, a warlike god, and that doesn't make him one of the Vanir, because the Vanir preside over peace. Another example, many neo-pagans who follow or practice the neo-pagan Nordic religious branch of Vanir like to include Gullveig into the Vanir. Why? Because clearly she isn't one of the Aesir. And so because of the common mistake of understanding the Norse pantheon as only two tribes, they place gods that don't have a clear allegiance to any tribe or are not perceived to belong to the Aesir. They place such gods in the group of the Vanir, as if the Vanir were the tribe that welcomes downtrodden gods or gods that have no home and need a place to stay. Those who think that Gullveig belongs to the Vanir, they couldn't be more far from the truth, and sorely mistaken. Sure, she is a figure linked to magic. She expresses magic, and we all know that the Vanir are the tribe of gods, propitiators of magic as well. But does that make Gullveig one of the Vanir? Of course not. She is chaos, she is death, and she is destruction. Gods linked to war, to powers of destruction, chaos and disorder are not gods of peace and plenty. The Vanir are the gods of peace and plenty, and the main attributes of Freyr, Freyja and Njordr are connected to peace and plenty. That doesn't mean they don't have other attributes, but as I've said, to distinguish the gods, we must look at what they don't have in common. And when I said that there are gods that are linked to war, powers of destruction, chaos and disorder, I don't mean it as if it were something strictly bad, because such powers can also propitiate good things, such as protection, for instance. But there it is. That's something many gods have in common, one way or another. So to understand who exactly are the Vanir, we must look into the powers they don't have in common with other gods. Otherwise, there would be no distinctions whatsoever, because each god has something in common with another. So, the Vanir are only three gods, or at least the gods that reached our days through the literary sources and archaeological evidences. And those three gods are Freyr, Freyja and Njordr, gods of peace and plenty. There might have been more gods, judging by the gods of fertility in Bronze Age rock carvings, for instance, but we know nothing about them and who they really were. And sure, you can argue, as some of you already did, what about Aegir and Ran? Aren't they Vanir? No, they aren't. They are in the group of gods of the sea. And then you say, but Arif, Njord is also a god of the sea, and you just said he is one of the Vanir. Yes, Njord is also a god of the sea, but didn't I just tell you to look for the aspects and powers the gods don't have in common? Njord isn't one of the Vanir because he is a god of the sea. Njord is of the Vanir because his main attributes propitiate peace and plenty. With certainty, we can say that Njord, Freyr and Freyja are from the Vanir. The Vanir are not the gods that express notions of good and evil or right and wrong, and they do not express ideals of justice and good conduct as the Aesir do, and they also do not express powers of chaos, disorder, destruction and war. The Vanir are the gods that in all essence transmit the power of peace, plenty and the power to create new life, but new life precisely under the conditions of peace and plenty, which leads to a state of harmony, which brings about fertility. As said before, the deities known as the Vanir are by no means easy to define, but we do know they preside over peace and plenty. That was their main attributes and gifts, and that was what people praised the most, judging by the amount of place names derived from the names of Vanir deities. There are more place names derived from Vanir deities than any other gods combined, which shows there were a lot of places in Scandinavia the Vanir deities were highly praised above all others. This helps to undo the image we have of Scandinavians as warlike people living in a warrior culture. There is no mistake, there were warriors, obviously, and there were a lot of internal conflicts as well as external. But the warrior class was a tiny fraction within the Scandinavian societies when compared to the rest of the population. We are talking about people, in the great majority, were farmers, fishermen, craftsmen, hunters, people tied to the land. So it's not hard to picture that the greatest majority of people praised peace and plenty and cared little about the wars of their lords as long as they don't bother the common folk, obviously. Peace and plenty was what the greatest majority of pre-Christian Scandinavians prayed for. And that is noticeable in the great amount of place names derived from Vanir deities. And once again, we must not forget that Thor wasn't of the Vanir, but he too was as much worshipped as the god Freyr. And Thor is a warrior figure, and his aspect of thunder god reflects his destructive and chaotic powers. However, the great majority of the Scandinavian populations worshipped Thor the same way they worshipped Freyr, as a fertility god, and also as a god called upon in important ceremonies that reflect important aspects of life, such as weddings. And let's not forget that Thor was a god of the common folk, mainly farmers, and while the upper classes had afterlife halls for their own, such as Valhalla, Folkevangre, and possibly even Valaskjalf, the common folk expected to go to Thor's halls after death, because he was their god. I'm not denying that Scandinavians praised or worshipped warlike gods as well, but that was a tiny fraction of the religious panorama in pre-Christian Scandinavia, reserved for the upper classes, nobility and warriors of high birth. Warrior gods weren't as much the focal point of pre-Christian Scandinavian religion as the worship of deities that presided over peace and plenty. So the peace and plenty pattern, as well as the fertility one, is a definite one, easy to recognize in the Vanir deities and all that encompasses their worship. And because the great majority of the pre-Christian Scandinavian populations worshipped these deities, in many ways the Vanir are the gods closest of all the heathen deities to mankind. What I mean with this is that many of the gods were worshipped in specific occasions, in specific celebrations and festivities, and called upon in specific moments for specific needs. But the Vanir were almost constantly present in the daily lives of pre-Christian Scandinavians, precisely because the Vanir preside over life in general, and everything that life comprises was a reason to celebrate. Pagans did not worship death, and death wasn't the main reason to be alive and focus the religious life on it. Pagans worshipped life, while Christianity and such other religions are religions of death. Pagan religions are religions of life. Everything that was important in life was reason enough to praise and to celebrate. And so the Vanir gods would be constantly present. And this is another important aspect within ancient pagan religions. there wasn't a separation between the social and the religious, or rather, the religious life was part of the everyday life activities of the pagans. Certainly, within the great urban centers, things would have been conducted differently, and the nobility held the religious power and conducted the religious ceremonies. But in the countryside, which was the great social and economic reality, the religious was very much part of the people's daily lives. While the nobility praised the gods on specific occasions and held the ceremonies for their subjects, in the countryside the gods were praised every day from dawn till dusk, until those gods were mostly the Vanir, which also helps to explain the great amount of place names derived from the Vanir, more than any other non-Vanir deities combined. But even among nobility, the Vanir were highly praised. Take the example of the line of kings in Scandinavia. The male god Freyr appears in many different localities and has also been represented by many different men, priests or priest kings, who impersonated this deity. Many lines of Scandinavian kings believe that their line comes directly from Freyr, and some kings took the name of Freyr as their own, acting on behalf of the god, impersonating him on various occasions. The figure of the king himself acting as the priest king. In ceremonies, the king himself leading the wagon with the fertility deity in it. Freyr's name is really a title, meaning Lord, while Freyja means lady. Perhaps in the Lord and Lady of the May Day festivities we are seeing their final manifestation and the last glimpse of the fertility powers. And we also have the name Frodi as well, who some people believe to be another fertility god, but in fact it's also a title, actually an adjective describing Freyr as the fruitful one. And the list of kings called Frodi in Saxo Grammatical's accounts implies that it was a title which many men bore in turn. Kings took on the role of these fertility deities and acting as the givers of prosperity, if the Vanir favored them, of course. So it's not only among the common folk that the Vanir were highly praised, but among nobility as well. The idea that pre-Christian Scandinavians worshipped Odin as their major god is absolutely wrong. Odin was mainly the god evoked by skalds, by poets, and it was mainly a literary phenomenon, especially after the Viking period, already during the Catholic period of Iceland in the 13th century, when Snorre Sturluson gives a lot of emphasis on the god Odin, not only because Snorre equated Odin with the Christian god, because Snorre was writing for Christians, not for pagans, but also because the great majority of the sources he had in hand to help him compose the Prose Edda were sources that indeed talked a lot about Odin, because those accounts had been composed by poets, and poets praised Odin quite a lot. And obviously these sources come down to us in this manner, which gives us the belief that Odin was indeed the major god among pagan Scandinavians. Odin in pre-Christian Scandinavia was by no means the main god except for poets and some members of nobility. Ordinary people worshipped Thor, Freyr, Freyja, Njordr, and possibly even Huldr and Skadi. This is why it is important to intensely be aware of updated academic work, and the academic work by any means mustn't be forgotten or put aside if we want to truly get closer to the actual pre-Christian pagan mentality. When some of you say that I'm lying to try to destroy paganism or destroy your ancestral beliefs, no, my good friends. On the contrary, actually, I'm trying to help to reach the actual essence of the pagan mentality without continuing to feed the same mistakes and delusions that lead pagans further astray from actual paganism. I too am trying to filter every little bit of information to reach the point closer to the actual pagan worldview without Christian influences that give us wrong ideas of the past. You either accept the truth and try to conduct your life according to it and always eager to pursue the path that leads to the truth, or you keep feeding your mind with the same lies and, in some cases, honest mistakes, and you remain on a stagnated perception of your ancestral beliefs, as you like to profess. One of the important aspects of the Vanir is that they are completely amoral, unconcerned with the rightness or wrongness of something, in the sense that their province was not to distinguish between good and evil, or to bring people the ideals of justice, or to teach about loyalty. The true gift of the Vanir goes beyond all preconceived ideas of the social panorama that maintains order. The Vanir express their power and give that power to mankind, and that power is the creation of new life that brings increase into the fields, among animals, and within the home. And of course, they bring the powers to connect humankind to the unseen world. Besides the fertility aspects expressed in new crops, human and animal babies, newborns, new life, the gift of the Vanir also includes wise counsels granted through divination, when these deities speak through a human mouth. We have the figure of the seeress. She is the link between mankind and the Vanir, sometimes possibly appearing in the guise of Freya, at occasions coming into people's homes to convey the blessings of the goddess herself. Just as kings took the name of Freyr or impersonated him in ceremonies, so would the queen do the same, or specific priestesses of Freya, acting on behalf of the goddess, impersonating her, expressing her powers and giving her power through the human figure that incorporated the goddess. Not just in the figure of Freya, but also, as I've expressed before on another video, I don't remember which one now, there are references to a Norse deity called Lithir. Most likely, by the explanations we get, it was one from the Vanir tribe of gods, the Fertility Deities, one equivalent to Freyr, or yet another title of Freyr. Lithir seems to have been a Swedish god who presided over fate and related to divination. This god would be carried on a wagon, and the wagon would be led by the king into the place of ceremony, and in there offerings were given to Lithir, and the king would then proceed to ask questions to the deity, since Lithir was a god connected to fate and divination. We are not told how this god communicated, but it's quite possible that it would be the king himself who would impersonate this deity, and it wasn't a physical representation of the deity that would be carried in a wagon, but it would most likely be the king himself acting as a priest king, incorporating the deity and speaking through the deity. I hope you are paying attention to the notes I have left here concerning Lithir, and among other things. But I think the gift of life was the most important expression of power coming from the Vanir. It is a mysterious power, but essential to thrive and survive and keep on living. Without fertility, plenty, peace, and all that encompasses life and the creation of new life, all other aspects have no real meaning. For what good is victory, justice, good fortune, if life is devoid of that which makes it strong and growing and flourishing? All other blessings from other gods are worthless and empty things, because if the crops fail and if children die, there is no future in the community, and the sense of doom overwhelms all other blessings when hope fades. Absolutely everyone in heathen times at some point has paid some service to the fertility powers, which were the powers that had the ultimate response to the future of the community. Nothing matters if there isn't the continuation of life, both sustenance and birth, to carry on living. And in Northern Europe, this was no exception. If anything, Northern Europeans had more reasons to praise the Vanir and fertility gods than any other. If the cold and harsh winters and the long dark nights prevented the blessings, the power and the glorification of the Vanir, then the gift of life these gods provided was the more precious because of the precarious conditions in the world and the dark frigid soils that awaited to receive such blessings. And what else is life all about? Sex. Listen, to get in touch with the life-giving deities, there was the necessity of specific ceremonies, and one of the ceremonies involved orgies. I'm not saying this lightly. In many ancient pagan religions, the ceremonies to be in touch with life-giving gods and to propitiate fertility and receive such life-giving powers, it involved orgies, which have always been part of fertility cults. The orgy in these ceremonies is a recreation of the myth of creation. From the chaotic involvement, the participants are filled with new energy for the creation of life. And in this almost theatrical involvement, to express the mythical chaos that existed before the creation, the orgy makes it possible to creation to be repeated. The spreading of the seed. I know some of you might giggle at this, I can almost hear it, or you can even sneer, but it is of my belief that I'm talking to adults. Orgies were quite common in fertility ceremonies in many pagan religions. Orgies in this case were meant to recreate the beginning of new life, the spreading of the seed, which required the energy of fertility to thrive. The religion of the Vanir was bound to include orgies, ecstasies, and sacrificial rites. As said before, the Vanir were amoral, and they did not express notions of good or evil or ideas of justice and what is right and what is wrong. Moral sense or perceptions of moral sense don't exist in the cult of the Vanir. It seems there were many who worshipped the Vanir, which isn't surprising given the life-giving aspects of the Vanir, and their cult revolved around life itself. And people would certainly find the worshipping of the Vanir to be more rewarding and comforting than that of the sky god of war. The friendship of the Vanir had none of the treacherous qualities of Odin's favors. As you well know, throughout the myths, Odin is a tremendously treacherous god, and he gives with one hand and he takes with the other, and all he does for his sole benefit, the archetype of the relentless pursuer of knowledge to acquire great wisdom by any means necessary. And if some people still think he was a benevolent god, well, they are being just as blind as the followers of the Christian God or any tyrant figure. The worshippers of the Vanir were very conscious of the earth and therefore remembered and venerated the dead ancestors who rested within the earth. The sky was not the Vanir's concern. The Vanir were focused on the earth and the seas, on the realms that give and sustain life. And just as the dead return to the earth, they too propitiate fertility and will be reborn within the womb of the earth. There has always been a close link between the Vanir and the depths of the earth and the sea. The Daunic element is present in their worship, and we can clearly see that in the myths and other literary works. For instance, the Vanir male gods look for brides among the giants, and Freyr himself looked down into the underworld to find the maiden Gerda, to whom he gave his love. The spirits of the earth and the sea are connected to the Vanir, and it was those same spirits that assisted the Cirrus in her journeys to the other world and helped her to win hidden knowledge. But more about the cult of the dead on another video. In fact, many of the subjects or the topics that I have expressed in this video, I will cover them in future videos. So, my dear friends, now that there are no metal birds to interrupt me, in conclusion, we can say with certainty that Njord, Freyr and Freya are of the Vanir. Perhaps there were more gods, but they have been lost to us. But it's these three gods who are the embodiment of what the Vanir tribe of gods truly represents. Peace, prosperity, plenty, fertility, the power to link with the unseen through divination, and the laws of nature that are somewhat out of human control. The Vanir are indeed the gods of all things outside the community that people need to survive and be alive. Not the gods of chaotic and destructive aspects of nature, not the embodiment of celestial bodies, not the personification of the wild side of nature, but the embodiment of the natural world outside the community that mankind needs to be alive and to survive. The Vanir are the personification of the gift of life, because if crops fail, if children die, if there is no fertility, healing, rejuvenation, the communities are doomed and without hope. And of course, without a touch with the mysterious and the unseen, we do not quite understand our place in all of this. Without magic and a sense of mystery, we are simply frigid and listless beings, just an empty husk. Magic gives us enthusiasm to appreciate the gift of life, because life itself is magical. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. Welcome to 2020, and may the life-giving powers continue to flow, because as long as we live, there is always hope.